Hey guys, tonight we drift down to the quiet riverbanks of ancient Nubia, where the air feels warm enough to slow your heartbeat, and the Nile glides past like a giant creature too lazy to notice you. You're standing there, well, technically trudging there, your sandals already gathering soft mud, the sun sliding across water that looks like melted bronze. A few potters are hunched over their tools, barely glancing up, as if your sudden arrival from the 21st century is the least weird thing they've seen today. And sure, you might imagine that making river clay jars is a peaceful Pinterest-style activity. But honestly, with this heat, these insects, and this mud that sticks to you like a clingy X, you probably won't survive this for long. Before we go deeper, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough to type, drop your location and the local time in the comments. It's always fun seeing who else is drifting off with you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You follow a narrow footpath that winds between tall reeds, each one whispering in the breeze like gossiping neighbors. A couple of Nubian potters glance your way, not surprised, not alarmed, just giving you that, "Yep, another lost traveler in weird clothes" expression people have probably used since the dawn of time. One of them is crouched low, his toes gripping warm sand as he leans over a half-finished jar. You notice immediately that the potters here work with a rhythm that feels almost rehearsed. Not dramatic, just patient, steady, sleepy even. Exactly the kind of energy you need right now. A mainstream historical fact slips in as naturally as the river flow. Nubian communities relied heavily on riverine clay deposits, which they collected seasonally based on flood cycles. The potters time their work with the river's mood, which, frankly, feels more reliable than your sleep schedule. But here's the quirky tidbit, the kind historians quietly adore. Some Nubian potters believed certain riverbank spots produced gentle clay, while other patches made stubborn clay that misbehaved. And honestly, after watching them poke at a pile of mud while muttering under their breath, you start to think they may not have been entirely wrong. As you walk, your feet sink into soft mud, warm like baked bread. It squishes upward between your toes in a way that's almost soothing, until you worry briefly that some ancient Nile creature might mistake your foot for a snack. One potter waves at you lazily, like he's been waiting for you to join today's shift. You know how YouTubers always say, "Smash that like button"? Well, this man looks like he'd say, "Smash that clump of clay flatter, please," and then go right back to work. You kneel beside a flat basket where fresh river clay rests like a sleeping animal, heavy, moist, and cool. When you press your thumb into the clay yields slowly, leaving a perfect print, almost like a tiny handshake. The potter next to you nods approvingly, as if you've passed some unspoken entry exam. Then he gestures toward the river, urging you to look closer. And you do. You watch the late morning light turn the Nile into an endless mirror, broken only by little ripples. In that moment, you almost forget that this calm water once held so many mysteries that historians still argue whether Nubian potters used ritual markers to decide where clay should be gathered, or if the choices were purely practical. Like most historical debates, it probably depends on which scholar had their coffee that morning. A fisherman paddles past on a small wooden boat, waving at the potters like a guy greeting coworkers during a slow Monday shift. Birds pick their way across the shallow waterline like tiny, fussy inspectors. Everything moves at a pace that feels soothingly uneventful. There's a light joke from one of the potters. You don't understand the ancient dialect, but the teasing tone is universal. Judging by his grin and your muddy shins, you assume he's making fun of your rookie stance. You shrug. Fair enough. Standing in mud is harder than it looks. You keep moving along the riverbank, watching women gather reeds for roofs and baskets, while children splash around in water that feels like bath temperature. Nobody is rushing. Nobody is panicking. Everyone simply flows with the Nile, the way the clay will soon flow between skilled hands. You get the sense that in this world, time stretches like soft dough, elastic, gentle, and entirely uninterested in deadlines. A potter taps your elbow and points at a fresh clay mound. The message is clear. Your day in ancient Nubia has officially begun.
You follow the potter who tapped your elbow, stepping carefully so the mud doesn't steal your sandals. He leads you to a shaded patch beneath a woven canopy where several heaps of river clay sit like lazy gray boulders. These piles look innocent enough, right up until you try lifting one. The potter gestures for you to kneel, hands already diving into the clay with that confident, "I've done this every day of my life" energy. You copy him, sinking your fingers into the cool, dense mound, and it immediately fights back like a stubborn cat refusing a bath. He laughs softly, and you swear he's enjoying this a little too much. This is where the real work begins, gathering and kneading the river clay, the stuff that will one day become a cooking jar strong enough to sit over a fire for hours. You can feel every tiny grain of silt, the occasional pebble, and the faint grit left behind by the Nile's past floods. It's gritty, sticky, and clearly has no desire to behave, which is why Nubian potters spend so much time taming it. A mainstream historical fact slides into place as you keep kneading. Nubian communities selected clay deposits according to the Nile's annual flooding, knowing that freshly settled alluvial layers produce the most workable material. You can see why. They're basically clay connoisseurs. Meanwhile, you're sweating and wondering how your gym never prepared you for this. You scoop up a handful, trying to knead it the way the potter shows you, folding, pressing, folding again. It's oddly therapeutic, like a fidget toy made by nature herself. Still, this particular batch seems to have a personality problem. It cracks where it should stretch, flops where it should firm up, and clings to your palms like it has abandonment issues. There's your second light joke for the hour. If clay had a horoscope, this one would absolutely be a dramatic Leo. The potter mimes adding water, then sand, then more water, adjusting the consistency with the casual precision of someone who doesn't need measuring cups because he has fingers. Fingers that know exactly how a jar should feel before it even exists. He directs your attention to a woman who's testing clay by rolling out long, thin coils. She snaps one gently, listens to the break, nods. The potter whispers something that you interpret as, "See, the clay tells you everything." Meanwhile, your coil breaks in 3 uneven chunks, announcing loudly, "You have no idea what you're doing." A quirky tidbit emerges naturally as you keep kneading. Some potters believe that certain parts of the river gifted mature clay that behaved better, while other zones produced young clay that needed scolding, literally spoken to, before it cooperated. Looking at the chunk in your hands, you consider trying the scolding method. Can't hurt. While you work, goats wander past, bleating like tiny grumpy supervisors checking your progress. A few children stop to watch you, whispering and laughing at your messy technique. Their pottery skills probably exceed yours, but you pretend not to notice. Then you hear 2 elders debating, softly, thoughtfully, the ideal ratio of sand to clay. And here comes the scholarly debate requirement. Historians still argue whether Nubians intentionally mixed tempering agents like sand and crushed potter's sherds to strengthen their vessels, or if these additives simply accumulated naturally from the environment. Either way, your potter has clearly strong opinions because he scoops sand with a flourish that says, "Yes, I'm right," and the river agrees. The clay is finally starting to behave under your palms, warming to your touch, softening into something workable. You fold it again and again, feeling its structure change. It's like it's learning your hands, finally deciding you're trustworthy. A breeze ripples across the river, carrying the scent of wet earth and sun-warmed reeds. It slips under the canopy and cools the back of your neck. You breathe in gently, letting the moment soften. The potter nods at your progress with a small smile. the universal sign for not terrible. A water jar is passed to you, and you take a long drink. The cold sweetness hits just right. For the first time, you feel yourself settling into the rhythm of this ancient world. Slow, patient, purposeful. And as the potter motions for you to gather more clay from the riverbank, you realize this place, this warm, humming, muddy world, is starting to feel strangely peaceful.
You carry the newly kneaded clay toward a shaded working area, your arms feeling heavier than you expected. The potters are already settling into their shaping stations, low mats, smooth stones, and a few wooden tools worn down by decades of use. One elder pats the ground beside him, inviting you to sit. When you do, the warm sand shifts beneath you, settling like a cushion shaped by centuries of potters before you. He places a lump of clay in front of you with the same seriousness someone might hand over a newborn puppy. You gulp. No pressure. Shaping a jar begins with a slow, spiraling gesture. The artisan coils a thin roll of clay into a tight circle, then builds upward layer by layer, using only his fingers, water, and patience. No pottery wheel here, just hands. Hands that move with the confidence of someone who could probably shape a perfect jar even while half asleep. You try to mimic him. Your first coil leans so far to the left it looks like it's trying to escape the scene entirely. The potter chuckles, gently straightening it before handing the jar back, like, "There, now try not to ruin it." You appreciate the optimism. A mainstream historical fact blends into the moment. Many Nubian potters in antiquity used the coiling technique rather than wheels, valuing control over the jar's thickness and heat resistance. Watching them, you understand why. Every tap, every pinch, every slow upward pull gives the clay the strength it needs to become a cooking vessel capable of surviving open flame. You smooth the walls with a damp finger, circling the rim again and again. The clay responds better now, either because you're improving or because it pities you. A soft breeze stirs the reed walls. Someone cracks a tiny joke, too low for you to understand, but everyone chuckles, including you, because laughter is contagious, even across centuries. That's sleep joke number 1 for this section. If humor were an export, Nubian potters would have made a fortune. Nearby, a woman uses a polished gourd to burnish the surface of a half-finished jar. She rubs it in circles until the clay gleams softly, almost like the river under morning sun. You tried burnishing too, but your jar squeaks loudly, earning a few raised eyebrows. Apparently jars aren't supposed to squeak. Who knew? A quirky pottery tidbit floats your way. Some Nubian artisans believed that tools made from gourds transferred a gentle spirit to the jar, softening the finished color and making the vessel more pleasant to cook with. Looking at your jar, which is already leaning slightly again, you decide it could use all the positive spiritual reinforcement possible. You press your thumbs into the clay, smoothing the inside curve. The potter nods approvingly, then taps the rim lightly, an unspoken reminder to keep things even. You circle the rim again, focusing on tiny details, thickness, shape, symmetry. You're nowhere near perfect, but somehow it feels meditative. The slow movements, the cool clay, the steady breathing, it's like pottery ASMR before ASMR ever existed. Another artisan turns to the group and mutters something that triggers a debate. You only catch the tone, not the meaning, but your guide whispers a translation. They're arguing over whether jars should flare outward or inward at the neck. And here comes your required scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether regional differences in Nubian jar shapes reflected practical cooking needs or cultural aesthetics. Judging by the passion here, the debate is older than writing itself. You add another coil, smoothing the seam with your thumb. This time it blends beautifully. No cracking, no sagging. The elder raises his brows, clearly impressed. The jar isn't perfect, but it's definitely jar-shaped.
a victory. Children run past, chasing a dog that looks extremely unbothered by its role in the chaos. Your jar wobbles slightly, but you stabilize it with both hands. That counts as your second joke for the section. You now have the reflexes of a parent with a toddler learning to walk. The potter adjusts your posture, guiding your elbows inward so your hands can shape the clay more gently. And suddenly, something clicks. Your fingers glide upward, coaxing the form into something smoother, more confident. The shape grows, graceful and even. In that moment, surrounded by reed shadows and soft voices, you feel yourself sliding deeper into the ancient rhythm. The world outside this workshop fades. It's just you, the clay, and the steady heartbeat of a civilization that perfected simplicity. The elder brushes a tiny bit of sand from your jar and gives you a nod, your first silent stamp of approval. It feels surprisingly good. The sun shifts, the shadows stretch, and your jar, still damp and fragile, waits patiently for its next stage.
You lift your carefully shaped jar, cradling it like a sleepy cat, and follow the potter toward a sunlit clearing. The air shifts as you step outside the shade. The warmth wraps around you instantly, a soft blanket woven from sunlight and dust. Out here, dozens of jars in various stages of drying sit on woven mats, each catching the light differently. Some glow faintly pink, others a muted gray-brown. It feels a little like a nursery, but instead of babies, it's full of fragile, half-finished vessels, hoping today won't be too windy. The potter gestures for you to place your jar on an empty mat. You set it down gently. Very gently. Much more gently than necessary. Your potter friend gives you a look that says, "Relax, it's not going to explode." Maybe not, but after all the mud wrestling and coil wrangling you've done, you're not taking any chances. This stage is simple in theory. Let the jar dry just enough so it can handle the next steps without cracking. The catch? The sun here is powerful, like could cook an egg on your forehead powerful. Managing the drying process means adjusting the jar's exposure, moving it into shade or rotating it as needed. One potter strolls down the row, tapping jar rims lightly, listening for something. You can't tell if he's checking dryness or just having a casual conversation with them. A mainstream historical fact fits in naturally. Nubian artisans relied heavily on sun drying before firing, using the region's hot climate to remove moisture slowly and evenly. It sounds easy, but judging by the number of potters squinting at the sky, it's practically meteorology. Your jar is still soft. You can tell because when a small breeze moves across it, the surface ripples ever so slightly. The potter leans down, shielding it with a woven reed screen. He nods at you as if to say, "Good job. Now don't touch it for a while." You nod back with the intense seriousness of someone guarding a priceless museum artifact. Nearby, a group of women mix slip in shallow bowls, a smooth, creamy clay mixture used to coat the jar's surface. Their movements are steady and hypnotic, each steering motion a soft, circular whisper. The slip has colors ranging from pale ochre to a warm reddish tone, depending on the clay source. When they scoop it with their hands, it drips like thick paint, glistening softly. A quirky tidbit emerges as you observe them. Some Nubian potters believed adding fine ash or crushed shells to slip made a jar sing better over the fire, meaning it heated evenly and produced fewer crack sounds. You imagine modern cookware commercials using that slogan, introducing the pot that sings. When your jar reaches the no longer wobbly, not yet stiff stage, the potter hands you a small bundle of reeds. It's your turn. You dip your fingers into the slip, it's surprisingly cool, and brush it slowly across the jar's surface. The clay drinks it in. Smooth, silky.
You leave even sweeps like someone painting a wall for the first time and trying very hard to pretend they know what they're doing. The potter points out a small uneven patch. You smooth it again, slower this time. The slip glides beautifully. He nods. Approval level, 7 out of 10. Not bad. Your joke requirement floats into your mind as you watch other jars being coated. Here's your moment. You realize your jar looks a bit like it's getting a spa treatment. Exfoliation, moisturizing, gentle sun exposure. If jars could talk, yours would be saying, "I feel renewed." In the distance, two artisans fall into a discussion, mild, calm, and familiar. Your guide explains that they're debating the ideal slip thickness. And here's your scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the decorative slips found on ancient Nubian pottery served primarily aesthetic purposes or if they were functional layers that improved cooking durability. Judging by the way these two artisans are gesturing, this conversation has probably been going on since the Old Kingdom. Once the slip settles, your jar is moved slightly closer to the sun. Not too close, not too fast. The potter shades his eyes with one hand, watching the sky the way surfers watch waves. You ask if he can predict drying speed this way. He just shrugs, the universal sign for maybe, maybe not. A child passes by and gently pokes your jar. You inhale sharply, but the jar holds. The potter chuckles. Your heart rate returns to normal. Hours pass in the soft, slow rhythm of drying clay. You help rotate jars. You help shade jars. You help shoo away a stray goat nibbling at the reed screens. The world feels simple here, quiet, practical. Every movement has purpose, but no rush. By late afternoon, your jar, now matte, smooth, and firm, has joined the ranks of vessels ready for the final transformation.